Imagine this. You're on a family vacation. The sun has set over the Algarve coast in Portugal. The resort town of Praia de Luz is quiet, its whitewashed walls glowing under the street lamps, the sound of the ocean steady in the background. Parents relax over dinner just a short walk away. Children are tucked safely into bed. But then, something happens that no parent can ever prepare for. On the night of May 3rd, 2007, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann vanished from her family's holiday apartment while her parents were only a few steps away. One moment she was asleep in her bed, her twin siblings nearby. The next she was gone. And in that instant, an ordinary family vacation turned into one of the most haunting mysteries of our time. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann captured headlines across the globe. Within hours, the quiet seaside resort was filled with police, journalists, and later, investigators from multiple countries. Theories swirled: abduction, human trafficking, even tragic accident. Yet after 18 years, no body has ever been found, and the case remains unsolved. In 2020, German authorities identified a man named Christian Brueckner as the prime suspect. He was already serving time for unrelated crimes. But to this day, no court has convicted him in connection with Madeleine's disappearance. And without physical evidence, without Madeleine herself, the truth remains frustratingly out of reach. So here's the question that still echoes almost 2 decades later. How could a little girl disappear from a room just meters away from her parents? That question has driven countless investigations, news specials, and documentaries. It has divided public opinion, exhausted entire police units, and devastated a family who has never stopped searching for their daughter. Today, we're going to explore this case step by step in Cold Case Files: the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Our story will draw only from verified sources: Scotland Yard, the Portuguese police, FBI archives, and recent reporting from outlets like The Guardian and CNN as of June 2025. Where speculation exists, I'll tell you clearly that it's speculation. I want to invite you to listen closely, not only to the facts but also to the human story. The story of a child, of parents caught in a nightmare, and of investigators still chasing answers almost 20 years later. And as you listen, think about this. If it had been your child asleep in that room, what would you have done differently? To understand the weight of this mystery, we need to start at the beginning, with Madeleine herself, and the family who brought her to Portugal in search of nothing more than a simple holiday. To understand this story, we need to step back and meet Madeleine herself, and see the world as it looked in 2007. Praia de Luz, the resort town where the McCann family stayed, sits on Portugal's southern coast. It was, and still is, a peaceful place known for its narrow streets, whitewashed houses, and long sandy beaches. Back then, it was especially popular with families from the United Kingdom. It wasn't flashy or chaotic. It felt safe, almost like a small village where everyone kept an eye out for one another. In the middle of this quiet town was the Ocean Club, the holiday complex where the McCanns stayed. It offered tennis courts, pools, and apartment-style accommodations. For many British families, this was an affordable and relaxed way to vacation. Parents could enjoy dinner just a short walk away, while children slept soundly in their rooms. That was the atmosphere, a sense of trust and security. Now, let's talk about Madeleine. She was 3 years old at the time, the eldest child of Jerry and Kate McCann. Both of her parents were doctors. Jerry a cardiologist, Kate a general practitioner. They were devoted parents who loved their 3 children deeply. Along with Madeleine were her younger twin siblings, Sean and Amelie, just 2 years old. People who knew Madeleine often described her as bright, curious, and full of energy. She had blonde hair, a playful personality, and a distinctive mark in her right eye, an unusual detail in her iris that became one of the most widely recognized features in missing person posters around the world. Her family said she loved dressing up, playing with her friends, and she was especially attached to her stuffed toy, a pink cuddle cat that she carried almost everywhere. That trip to Portugal was supposed to be simple, a chance for relaxation with a group of close friends. Each evening, the parents would gather at a tapas restaurant on the resort grounds. From there, they could walk back to the apartments within just a few minutes. Their plan was to check on the children in shifts, keeping what they thought was a safe balance between adult time and parental responsibility. It's important to remember that in 2007, attitudes toward child supervision in holiday resorts were a bit different. Many parents felt comfortable leaving kids asleep in locked apartments while staying nearby. It wasn't considered reckless, especially in a family-oriented setting like Praia da Luz. But after Madeleine's disappearance, that assumption of safety was shattered. Imagine for a moment that you are a parent. Your child is only 3 years old. You tuck her into bed, knowing you'll be back soon to check on her. You feel relaxed, reassured by the calm of the resort. And then, just hours later, you return to find her gone. That contrast between the comfort of a family holiday and the terror of losing a child is what makes this case resonate so deeply even today. For the McCanns, what began as a joyful spring vacation turned into an enduring nightmare. And for countless other families, the story raised a chilling question. Could this happen to us too? The disappearance of Madeleine McCann didn't just devastate her parents. It shook communities across Europe and beyond. Newspapers across the United Kingdom splashed her photo on their front pages for weeks. Families began questioning the safety of holiday resorts they once trusted. Discussions about child protection, parental responsibility, and resort security systems became part of the public conversation. And yet, through all of that noise, one thing remained clear. At the heart of the story was not just a case, but a little girl, Madeleine, whose life had barely begun. That's why, when we talk about what happened on the night of May 3rd, we need to keep her humanity at the center. This was not a headline or a mystery novel. This was a real child, loved by her family, suddenly missing without a trace. And so, as we move into the next part of this story, let's return to that night in 2007. The evening was ordinary, almost uneventful. But as the sun set over Praia da Luz, the McCanns could not have imagined that their daughter's absence would soon dominate the attention of the entire world. Now let's step into the evening of May 3rd, 2007, the night that changed everything. The day itself had been uneventful. The McCanns and their friends, often called the Tapas Seven, because they dined together each night at the resort's tapas restaurant, spent their hours at the pool, walking along the beach, and looking after their children. It was the kind of ordinary holiday routine that gives parents a sense of calm. Dinner reservations were set for 8:30 that night. Before leaving, Jerry and Kate put Madeleine and the twins to bed in their apartment at the Ocean Club. Madeleine was wearing her pajamas, her cuddle cat tucked close. The parents made a decision they had made before. Instead of hiring babysitters from the resort, they would check on the children themselves every 30 minutes. Their table at the restaurant was only about 160 feet away, just a 2-minute walk. At around 9:05, Jerry left the table for the first check. He walked back, opened the apartment door, and saw the children asleep just as he had left them. Nothing seemed out of place. On his way back, he spoke briefly to a fellow guest who later recalled the encounter. To Jerry, everything seemed normal. Roughly 25 minutes later, at 9:30, another parent from their dinner group went to check on his own children. On the way, he glanced into the McCann's apartment and noticed the door was partly open. He didn't hear anything alarming, but that small detail stood out later when investigators tried to reconstruct the timeline. Then came the moment that no one could ever forget. At around 10 o'clock, Kate McCann went for her turn to check. She opened the door to the children's room and felt a draft. The window was open, the curtain fluttering in the night air. The twins were asleep in their cots. But Madeleine's bed was empty. Kate rushed out, shouting, "Madeleine's gone!" The restaurant, the apartments, the poolside. Within minutes, panic spread through the Ocean Club. Guests and staff began searching the resort with flashlights, calling her name again and again. But no sound came back. The Portuguese police arrived quickly, but here's where the case began to unravel. The search wasn't tightly controlled. Friends, resort staff, and even strangers walked in and out of the apartment, moving objects, opening and closing doors. By the time forensic teams began collecting evidence, the scene was already compromised. That single fact would haunt the investigation for years. There were also immediate oddities. The window in the children's room was open, but there were no signs of forced entry. Could it have been opened from the inside? Did someone carry Madeleine out through the door instead? These questions surfaced within hours, but answers never came. And then there was the eyewitness account. Around 9:15, between Jerry's check and Kate's discovery, a tourist reported seeing a man carrying a small child in pajamas, walking away from the resort. The description was vague: dark hair, medium build, barefoot child. For years, this sighting was treated as potentially crucial. Yet despite countless appeals, no suspect was ever conclusively linked to it. Months later, investigators brought in specially trained dogs from the UK. Their findings became one of the most controversial elements of the case. The cadaver dog alerted to a spot in the McCann's apartment, and later to the rental car the family had hired 3 weeks after Madeleine disappeared. The blood dog also indicated traces inside that car. But laboratory tests were inconclusive. Too small a sample, not enough to confirm identity. The results raised suspicion in some corners, but they were never strong enough to stand as evidence. And so the timeline, while detailed, remains frustratingly incomplete. Madeleine was last confirmed safe at around 9 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, she was gone. In between lies a 60-minute window that has fueled nearly 2 decades of speculation. Ask yourself this. Could someone have been watching the family, waiting for the right moment to strike? Or was it simply a crime of opportunity, someone passing by at the exact wrong time? What we know for certain is that from that night forward, Praia da Luz would never be the same. Police patrols combed the town, helicopters searched from the air, divers swept the waters nearby. Yet no trace of Madeleine was found. This was the beginning of one of the most extensive and expensive missing person investigations in history. And as the days turned into weeks, suspicion shifted, theories multiplied, and the hunt for answers grew even more complicated. So where did the investigation go from here? Who became the focus of police efforts? And why has this case remained unsolved for so long? To understand that, we need to look closely at the investigation itself and the suspects who came under scrutiny. In the hours and days after Madeleine disappeared, the search in Praia da Luz expanded quickly. Portuguese police led the investigation, but from the very beginning, they faced enormous challenges. The crime scene had been compromised, evidence was minimal, and the international media had already descended on the town, adding pressure to an already fragile process. Within weeks, the case grew into something far larger than a local police matter. British authorities offered support, and over the years the investigation would eventually involve Interpol, the FBI, and finally Scotland Yard. In 2011, for years after Madeleine's disappearance, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation Grange, a formal review of the case. It would go on to cost more than £13 million, involve interviews with thousands of witnesses, and lead to multiple searches in Portugal, including one as recent as June 2025. But even with all of that effort, definitive answers never came. Instead, the investigation unfolded in waves, with suspects emerging and being ruled out, while the McCann family lived under a microscope. Let's start with one of the earliest suspects, Robert Murat, a British man who lived nearby and worked as a translator for the police. Rumors swirled around him, fueled partly by the fact that he had quick access to the area. But after a lengthy investigation, no evidence connected him to Madeleine. By 2008, he was officially cleared. Then, shockingly, suspicion turned toward Madeleine's own parents, Kate and Jerry. Because the cadaver dogs had indicated the presence of human remains in the family's rental car months after the disappearance, Portuguese police speculated about the possibility of an accidental death covered up by the McCanns. But that theory collapsed under scrutiny. Forensic results were inconclusive. No physical evidence tied them to any wrongdoing, and in July 2008, the couple was formally cleared of all suspicion. Still, that cloud of doubt, amplified by relentless tabloid coverage, left lasting scars on their reputations. Years passed, and leads went cold. Then, in June 2020, German prosecutors announced a breakthrough. They had identified a new suspect, a German man named Christian Brueckner. Brueckner was a convicted sex offender with a long criminal record, including burglary, child abuse, and rape. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance in 2007, he had been living in Portugal, often staying in a camper van near Praia da Luz. That vehicle, along with his phone records placing him in the area on the night Madeleine vanished, made him the most credible suspect in years. German authorities went further, saying publicly that they believed Madeleine was dead and that Brueckner was responsible. But here's the problem. So far, they have not produced the kind of concrete evidence needed to bring charges. According to The Guardian in 2025, Brueckner has been convicted of other crimes, including the rape of a woman in Portugal. But when it comes to Madeleine, the evidence remains circumstantial. Some of the accusations against him have come from fellow inmates and alleged associates. For example, one claimed that Brueckner boasted about knowing what happened to Madeleine. But these remain unverified statements, not admissible proof. And while prosecutors continue to investigate, as of mid-2025, No court has indicted him for her disappearance. Adding to the uncertainty, recent reports suggest that Brueckner may be released earlier than expected from his current prison sentence, potentially within the next few years. That raises an unsettling question. If he is the man responsible, could justice slip away forever? Meanwhile, Operation Grange has wound down much of its work. The June 2025 searches in Portugal were described as targeted and significant, but they did not yield any breakthrough. No remains, no personal belongings, no definitive clues. 18 years after the night in question, investigators are still working with fragments, not answers. It's important to pause here and reflect. Nearly every theory has been raised. That Madeleine was kidnapped by a stranger, that she was taken by a trafficking ring, that she wandered out of the apartment and suffered an accident. Each of these possibilities has been investigated, and yet none has been proven. The absence of physical evidence leaves a void that speculation rushes in to fill. And that raises a question I want to ask you as a listener. What do you make of this? If the prime suspect is a man with such a troubling past, but the evidence is never enough to convict, how do we balance suspicion with certainty? The McCanns themselves have never stopped searching. They continue to issue statements of hope every anniversary, reminding the world that Madeleine is not just a case file, but their daughter. And they hold on to the belief that someone somewhere still knows the truth. 18 years of searching, millions spent, multiple suspects investigated, and still, the mystery remains. Which brings us to the final question. What does this case leave us with? Beyond the theories and the suspects, what larger lessons and what enduring impact does the disappearance of Madeleine McCann carry for the world? That's what we'll explore in our conclusion. 18 years have passed since that night in Praia da Luz. Madeleine McCann, just 3 years old, vanished without a trace. Despite international investigations, millions of pounds spent, countless interviews, and even a named suspect in Christian Brueckner, the case remains unresolved. There has never been enough evidence to secure a conviction. And perhaps most haunting of all, Madeleine herself has never been found. This case has left more than unanswered questions. It reshaped how families think about safety when traveling, it highlighted the limits and the power of the media, and it revealed how a single story can grip the entire world. But at its core, it's still about a little girl, her family, and the search for truth. And maybe that's why it lingers with us. Because at some level, we all imagine ourselves in that situation. Parents asking, what if it were my child? Communities wondering, how could this happen in a place meant for rest and joy? And the world questioning, will there ever be closure? So now I want to ask you, what do you think really happened to Madeleine McCann? Do you believe Christian Brueckner is the man responsible? Or is there another explanation that investigators have missed? Share your thoughts, your theories, even your doubts in the comments. For the McCanns, hope still lives. They continue to say that until there is clear proof otherwise, they believe their daughter could still be alive. And that hope, fragile but enduring, has carried them through nearly 2 decades of uncertainty. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Cold Case Files, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. If this story moved you, or if you want to hear more investigations into the world's most enduring mysteries, don't forget to subscribe and follow the podcast. Because sometimes, even after years of silence, answers can still surface.